Let's bring in Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Dr. Azar Jammine, who joins us now to expand on this. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. The warning signs became clear by the end of 2022, but despite the urgent legislation introduced to avoid graylisting, it happened in February of 2023. With South Africa now likely to get off this grey list, perhaps give us some clarity and understanding on some of the factors that got the country in this position to begin with.
Essentially, South Africa was found to do insufficient to combat money laundering. And much of that insufficiency was also linked to practices that were actually corrupt, with government officials in many instances, as well as private sector businessmen being culpable in that regard. And I mean, the most classic example is, for example, illicit cigarette and tobacco production. That's just one example of it. There's many others. And South Africa was far too slow in preempting the action taken by the Financial Asset Task Force to grey-list us.
While smaller African countries like Botswana, Mauritius, Morocco and Zimbabwe have managed to get off this grey list, South Africa, with its advanced economy, remains grey listed. Is it perhaps more about political will than anything else? Plus the fact that South Africa is the continent's most prominent financial hub. I mean, how do we attribute this if a country like Zimbabwe is able to get off and South Africa isn't?
I think you're absolutely correct in highlighting the fact that the very fact that South Africa is a central player in Africa in terms of illicit transactions, by the very nature that it has to be the largest economy, that in itself makes it very vulnerable to being grey-listed. But clearly not enough action was taken, despite warnings previously, prior to February 2023, that we were going to be grey-listed. And by the time that we started taking action, it was far too late. The good news is that we seem to have continued to take action in this regard to try and get ourselves off the grey listing, and that has been very positively received by all accounts, even by the Financial Asset Task Force, although they are warning that we still do need to do a lot more. And it appears as if a lot of the effort that needs to be focused on is actually doing the research and convicting criminals and bringing them to book. It's that entire phase and that process that is still not cut and dried from South Africa's point of view. So in other words, a lot of action has been taken to stop money laundering, but not enough has been taken yet to actually force people who have been found guilty of money laundering, firstly to find them and then to actually convict them. That is the real problem. But it does go hand in hand with levels of corruption, and one can only hope that now, with the new government that we have in place, where you have a multitude of political parties keeping a watch over one another, that we will be more successful in that regard. And I am most encouraged to hear even people like the Governor of the Reserve Bank suggesting that he feels confident that we will actually see ourselves removed from grey listing. And then, just to put it into perspective, there are other fairly prominent countries that have also been grey listed. So it's not just a case of small ones, should be the ones to be grey listed. It's also a case of those in the center of financial transactions are themselves more vulnerable to being grey-listed.
Yeah. Do you think, just giving your perspective, that 2025 in terms of the likelihood is realistic, or could we see it stretched out even further to 2026?
I think there's a possibility that it will be stretched out further. We've certainly had the June 2024 verdict from the FATF, and that was that we still haven't done enough. So there is optimism that when they do this review in a year's time again, we will have done enough. Apparently, there are a number of milestones, one in September and one in January, that need to be looked at to assess what the likelihood is of us being removed from grey-listing in 2025. And the other thing to just bear in mind is that a lot of the damage done by grey-listing has already, in terms of affecting the exchange rate of the currency, has already been felt. Rand did weaken significantly just prior to and subsequent to the grey-listing. So to some extent, the fact that we're listed is already built into the currency. So one need not look for still further depreciation. The Rand is a particularly weak currency by international standards in terms of its purchasing power, because it has already built into its value the fact that we are listed.
Yeah.
And so the hope lies that if we do get removed from grey-listing, Rand share.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time and weighing in on this subject. Of course, we do apologize for that technical difficulty there, just the line not so great, but getting the gist of what Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Dr. Azar Jammine, had to say about South Africa's chances of being taken off the grey list.